Okay, hey everyone, my name's Laura. This is Keith. We're coming to you live from Salt Spring Island, and this is Hockey Talk on the Rock.
All right.
So, do you want to introduce yourself?
So, I'm Keith. We're on location at my home here on Salt Spring. I'm from Ladysmith originally and moved here 9 years ago, and I met Laura 5-6 years ago through my fiancée, Becca.
Yeah. Like you said, I'm Laura. I grew up on Salt Spring, but I've been away at school in Alberta for 9 years. So, as a diehard Canucks fan, that was a bit of a hard time for me. But yeah, I was fascinated by hockey from when I was very small for probably the most feminine reason of all time, which was that I thought the outfits they wore were really cool.
Nice.
So I always wanted to play, and I would bug my parents the whole time. Salt Spring is the biggest community in Canada that doesn't have an ice hockey rink or any sort of ice. And it wasn't until I was in high school that they let me play, and I ended up actually playing in North Saanich for the Peninsula Eagles, which is the team that Jamie Benn grew up playing for. So I'm wearing a Jamie Benn Team Canada jersey today, getting ready for Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final.
All right. Pretty stoked for that, and that's why I got my Kucherov jersey on.
Yes.
Kind of rooting on Tampa as the team of destiny, but I actually feel like Dallas might win it. Defense is pretty strong over there.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one, that's for sure. I think Tampa is definitely the better team if you look at them. It's just, do they have enough gas left in the tank?
Right. They do seem a little more banged up, especially their big guys.
Yeah. And, Point has obviously been phenomenal for them this whole time. I'd say he's probably their front runner for the Conn Smythe.
Yeah, if not him, Victor Hedman's doing some crazy stuff this year too.
Hedman has been unreal. But I don't know if I had to bet on a team. It's hard to bet against Tampa. I just feel like they're so set to win it this year. I'd be very happy if Dallas did win. Not as happy as if the Canucks had won, but it would be pretty big to see that for my local connection. And yeah, I think the whole goalie situation in Dallas, like with Hudobin, people are talking about how it's similar to Tim Thomas in 2011.
Your favorite goalie.
Of course, yeah, my favorite goalie. It's been fun to watch him play, not Tim Thomas, Hudobin. But I don't know if Dallas... You got to think psychologically, those big guys on Tampa are thinking, hey, we've got the backup in Dallas to play against. And I mean, you look at the Colorado series with Dallas, and if Colorado had had goaltending, that probably would have changed things. And I think Tampa is kind of right now like a beefed up version of Colorado.
It's true, and you got to consider as well that Tampa really hasn't faced a hot goalie in the playoffs, right? True. They kind of got lucky playing Halak instead of Rask in Boston. Columbus doesn't have an all-star goalie. Korpisalo had a good year.
Yeah.
And then they just had to, who'd they just get by there? The Islanders.
Varlamov
had a decent year, but they're more of a defensive team where the goaltenders really benefit from that, right?
Yeah. It's also interesting because it almost feels like every team that Tampa has played a very similar style.
Right.
And Dallas, I'd say, is more offensively talented than at least Columbus and, I don't know, New York, just because of the style they play, not necessarily the players they have. But, they've gone through big periods, years, where they couldn't really score.
Right.
So it is interesting that they're having this coming out party this year in the playoffs, and again, we'll see what happens tonight. Dallas should be more rested, obviously, than Tampa.
Yep.
But maybe Tampa is more in the game. It's been such a crazy playoffs in terms of timing. I don't know if rest is the enemy or is the key to success.
Yeah, they've certainly compacted the schedule.
Yeah, there might be back-to-backs if it goes Game 5
Right.
in the Stanley Cup playoffs, which I just think it's a bit unfair. I get that they're trying to compress this and wrap it up as fast as possible, but really, do they have to be back-to-backs in a Stanley Cup final? It basically weakens the games in the end of it.
It does. I mean, there's the no travel factor, but yeah, I mean, it's at least they're not flip-flopping like how do you feel how the NBA starts a series in a advanced round while others are still going on?
I don't like that because I rather focus on the actual series
round by round. Yeah, and it kind of throws a little bit of a disadvantage in that sense that, you know, if one team's up in the Western Conference Final and the other team's wrapping up their round 2 later, that, you know, they're likely finishing their conference final pretty early and they get this time to recover, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's interesting. And the other complete wild card, I guess, with Tampa Bay is if Stamkos plays, and if he does, what sort of impact that has on the team.
Right, what percent is he going to be at, right?
Yeah. And again, as a group, like, I don't know if you look at it from like a sports psychology perspective, but if you've been with a group, and I mean, to his like point or in support of Stamkos, he has been in the bubble with them, which must have been really hard because he's been there for over a month now, and you haven't been able to play any hockey. That's got to be pretty like shitty feeling.
Yeah.
But it must be weird in terms of a group if you're trying to win a championship and then you have a big player on your team who hasn't been there and he suddenly comes back and might not be himself. But for his sake, I mean, if they do win it, I hope that he's in the lineup because that would feel pretty shitty for him too. Obviously.
Well, I'm betting my next paycheck that they would pull the Chelios from Detroit and just sit him on the bench in his socks for a game or two. Just, you know, the loophole to get him on the cup just because he's one of those players that's been through so much. And what was I reading? They've been to the Eastern Conference Final 4 of the past 6 seasons, you know, always the bridesmaid.
Yeah.
So it's good for them to, as a unit, and it's good for Canucks fans to see a team like that, how long it can develop how hard it can be to finally get over the top. But
that's true. Yeah.
With a young crowd like that, a young group like the Canucks got, a cat's losing it next door.
Yeah. Tampa has been incredibly good for a very long time if you think about it. I mean, back in 2011, they almost played the Canucks in the Stanley Cup final. 1
goal, wasn't it, in overtime?
Yeah, and so if you think about it, they really have been knocking at this door for 10 years.
Yeah.
They've had some ups, some down seasons, obviously, but they've been a good team, and they've drafted well in later positions, which is also important. I mean, obviously there's Hedman and there's Stamkos and a few of those guys chucked in there, but they've kept this team pretty stocked with good young talent from their own system for quite a while, which is pretty cool.
And also in the short term, they've really learned from what they did wrong last year in their nightmare loss to Columbus and addressed that with, you know, physicality, the way they got pushed around so hard, even these little acquisitions like Luke Shen and a Zach Bogosian and a Pat Maroon. And then smartly, you know, it seemed a little expensive to throw first rounders out of the deadline for a Blake Coleman and a Barclay Goodrow, but they fit in so well to that system and brought a little more physicality they totally lacked last year. Yeah,
they're top 2 in the hits, I think, on Tampa this year, which for the playoffs, obviously, which is a big thing. It adds, obviously, the physicality in a series can totally swing a series one way or the other. So.
Absolutely. And it shows another thing about an organization's ability to do it right and be able to attract these guys like a Pat Maroon and Luke Shen for contract minimums because they look at the team and know that they've got a shot to, you know, win a Stanley Cup, and so they're willing to take a little bit less.
Yeah, for sure. And in that kind of note, I guess that from a Canucks perspective, you look at this team, the Tampa Bay team, and they're very similar to that team that went there last year. One major difference is that JT Miller is not there. So for him, you know, things turned out pretty well in Vancouver. He wanted a leadership position. He got that. But you got to think there's a part of him that's thinking, what if, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's pretty tough.
Yeah, it's hard to ignore something like that. Even as a hockey player, you try not to because there's nothing you can do about it.
No.
But, Yeah, of course, to be, with such a similar group last year. And,
Yeah.
like we talked about, the nightmare loss to Columbus, but to not be part of even, retracting those demons this year.
Yeah, it's got to feel for it. So once the cup is handed out and all is said and done, whoever wins, Dallas or Tampa, this is going to be a really interesting offseason because, well, we don't know when the next season is going to start at this point, but probably end of December, beginning of January from what things are shaping up to be, barring any major, I guess, societal breakdown. Or
right.
I think the NHL will be watching the NFL pretty close to see what they're doing and how things are working out for them. Because I get the feeling they probably want to avoid bubbles next year. But we'll see. We'll see about that. But there's a ton of teams that have basically no cap room.
Right.
Flat cap, and it'll be very, very interesting what happens with some of those big contracts. And not even like the Louis Ericssons or the James Neals, like good players, especially on teams like Florida, for example, who probably don't want to spend even to the cap next year. So I think it's going to be like this chaotic breakdown right around when the cup is handed out up until the draft free agency, right? It'll be very interesting, especially in the goalie department this year with what happens. And then on the other note of that, how that affects free agency, right? So
absolutely.
You got to think those big guys, the Halls, the Petrangelos, the Markstrom, I'll chuck in there, they're going to get paid.
They're going to get paid. It's going to be interesting to see how it all works because they took away the courting period this year.
Yeah.
So they can't have the before free agency little negotiations and talks here and there.
So yeah, I wonder for sure about that with like Edmondson and Montreal, if there's going to be more of those deals of teams trying to get a player just so they can kind of have a courting period with them for a 7th round pick or something like that.
Right.
It's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as you're not chucking away too many picks to Jim Benning. But yeah, it'll be interesting. Like this year is going to be so different from any year I think we've ever seen, and going into the following year even, it's really hard to see what's going to happen. I know, like, for the Canucks perspective, with their RFAs, I'm assuming they're probably not going to qualify. Like, I'm assuming that Jake Virtanen will be traded before we get to that point.
Right.
But, you look at a Troy Stetcher or something like that, I kind of think they're not going to qualify him, and then maybe you either try and get him for cheaper, or you just let him walk and try and revamp that blue line to what you want. Because, yeah.
By just adding free agents.
Yeah, free agents or some sort of trade, and I'm not talking about, like, Matt Dumba, Brock Besser deal.
Right.
But, like, there's stuff the Canucks could do on that blue line. And, like, in regards to the Matt Dumba thing, I just don't think that's the right piece for the Canucks right now.
Right.
Because if you're going to give him offensive minutes, you're not going to play him, like, basically with Hughes.
Right.
I don't think that would be a pairing that would work. And if you're chucking in someone like Brock, you want it to be a home run for your team.
Absolutely. And I don't think Brock Besser is the guy you want to be trading off that roster.
I agree. But the whole thing with the Canucks is very fascinating for me, like with their offensive players, because you have Toffoli, who you hear rumors about that the Canucks are making good progress with him in terms of offering a new contract, and they seem to value him quite high. I think he's 29. I think he's my age.
I think he just turned 29.
Yeah. And you look at that, and he might, again, you sign him for 5 years, it might work out okay. It might.
But then you have the expansion draft thing coming up too.
Yeah, and you just look at, there's a bunch of young players coming up for the Canucks that should be able to fill in that top 6 hole. So if you could sign, like, I'd be way more open to the Canucks keeping, like, a Josh Levo.
Yeah.
And, you can keep him for under $2 million probably this year. And then having him kind of as a blockade, I guess, or a piece just for them for a year or something.
Right.
And then wait and see if those young guys, if the Hoglanders and the Podkolzins can come in and,
So let's back up a second.
Okay.
And you're talking about Jake Virtanen getting traded before the free agency period.
Yes.
Do you see him as a sweetener deal for trying to get rid of maybe a Louis Eriksson contract, or do you see him as part of a bigger move to get some defense?
I don't know if Virtanen is attractive enough as a sweetener. And I only say that if the Canucks... I guess if the playoffs with Virtanen hadn't happened, and let's just say that the season ended and there's no bubble playoffs. And
18 goals, Jake Virtanen on pace for 20 goals.
Yeah. I think then he was appetizing for someone as a sweetener.
Right.
But it's just so obvious that there's rifts with him and management, with him and the coach. And I think that plays into an opposing team's hands, right? Yeah, you can take a flyer on a Jake Virtanen, and he might get you 20 goals. He might be effective, but you don't know at this stage. So what are you willing to give up for Virtanen?
Right.
Yeah.
And so, in this case, it's more about clearing the cap space, though, than what you're willing to give up or anything like that, right?
And possibly, like, maybe with a Sutter, with a Brandon Sutter and a Virtanen, let's say, if you retain salary on Sutter, I think maybe someone will do that. Again, partially because there's going to be a lot of people that like what Sutter brings as a fourth-line center.
Right.
A lot of traditional hockey minds that look at that.
Playoff, hard hockey.
Yeah, and you look at a team like maybe in Ottawa, which I know there's a lot of talk with a lot of bad contracts going to Ottawa, and obviously they're not going to take them all.
Right.
But you look at that lineup and you think, like, yeah, he could do kind of what he did in Vancouver for Ottawa.
Right.
And he does only have a year left. I don't think Virtanen, I guess this is what it comes back to, I don't think Virtanen will help you get rid of Louis Eriksson.
You don't think so?
Not right now.
I can almost see a team like Ottawa being interested in that because Louis is only earning $5 million over the next 2 years in real money, and for a team like Ottawa that might need to get to the cap floor, that $6 million might have a little bit of value to it, as well as they've had luck with, a recovery project with Anthony Duclair recently, where that really worked out. And he was an all-star for them, right?
For sure.
So they might be a little more willing to take a Virtanen and not give up too much in order to save that cap space, because that's going to be ultimately, it could be helpful for the Nucks there with Toffoli, Markstrom, if they want to keep Tanev.
Yeah. And it'll be very interesting. I get my gut reaction, like kind of hunch, is that Markstrom's going to end up in Colorado.
That would be scary.
Yeah.
It would be.
Because Colorado has cap space. They could chuck kind of whatever money Markstrom wants at him.
Absolutely.
And just say, we're going to go win a cup next year, kind of thing. Have that attitude. And they obviously need a goalie. Like, people are talking, obviously, because it's hockey, about Toronto with Markstrom, too.
Right.
But I don't know. I just get the feeling, if I had to predict that one, that he's...
I would agree, too. If I was going to pick one of those three who would be there wearing a different sweater next year, I think I would have to pick Markstrom at this point, because positionally, Tanev seems too important, because if he walks, the question is who's filling his spot.
Yeah.
They got to get someone at that point, so why not try to keep him?
Yeah.
Sure, he's a bit older, but you can see that him and Hughes were a great fit.
Yes.
And as well as Toffoli just fit in so well, too. You can almost see them taking, maybe not what you call a hometown discount, but maybe a little less than what they could have got on the market.
For sure.
But, what, like you mentioned previously, too, the goalies is going to be it's going to be a musical chair situation next year, where you could see someone like a Braden Holtby be willing to sign on in a Robin Lehner type deal to try and go for a cup and be a number 2 with a Demko or something like that.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be a lot of guys out there, Thomas Grace, other guys that are more sheltered in their systems. With the Islanders have a good defensive system, where the Canucks really don't.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But if Demko's going to be more of what he showed in the playoffs than what he did there in February, then you don't have to worry too much about the goaltending thing. It's where they could really save money. For
sure. It's a really hard position for Jim Benning to be in, because I don't know how much weight. They were all elimination games, and he played absolutely out of his mind.
Absolutely.
And I would like to think that is Demko going forward, but I don't know how there's no way you can know. You're betting on yourself at that
Such
point.
A small sample
You're
size.
betting on Demko because in February he really, not him, but the whole team without Markstrom almost lost that playoff spot for the Canucks. And, it's on one hand, I guess it's kind of like what Quinn Hughes was talking about with the offseason that the players got basically between the end of the regular season and the start of these play-in playoffs. It was almost like they were in another year. And it could be like that for Demko too, right? Goalies take a lot longer to develop, and it could have been that he just needed the experience of being the starter, I guess, in February, and then he took that time and he worked on his craft, and he's ready to start now. But again, it would be so nice to just have one more chance or see more of that sample size.
Absolutely.
Before you make that decision, but as you said, if they could spend, $5 million on their goalies in total, then that's huge for the Canucks moving forward. Right?
Oh, it would help so much.
But yeah, I don't remember what else I have.
That's okay. How do you feel about Tyler Mott? He's getting a contract for sure. Jim Benning loves him. Travis Green loves him.
I also love Tyler Mott.
So he's coming back.
Big Tyler Mott fan. I would say you don't have to pay him a lot of money at this stage right now, obviously. But for their bottom six, the Canucks, it's obviously a mess. But Tyler Mott is a very good piece. You look at him. You look at Zach McEwen. People are very excited about moving forward. You have Gaudette, who again right now we don't really know what Gaudette is. But I think with Tyler Mott, you can get him for somewhere around $1 million probably for the next couple years, and then see what you have in him. And
to me, Tyler Mott seems like he's going to be the ideal Seattle expansion draft candidate. Like we saw with Vegas, some of those underrated, hardworking players got taken, like from my Flyers, Mr. Pierre-Edouard Bellemare got taken, and it didn't seem like a big deal, but it affected their bottom six and their penalty kills so drastically, and it would be, I feel like, a similar thing if Mott got taken from the Canucks.
Yeah, for sure. And I at this stage, obviously we don't know what the Canucks are going to look like next year, but I mean, their penalty killing was a big part of the team in the playoffs this year. And you look at, who was on that penalty kill, where it's all those kind of overpaid bottom six forwards that the Canucks have. And you hope, as a Canucks fan, that not all those players are coming back.
Right.
But it'll be very interesting to see how that affects that part of their game too, right? Especially with Malhotra moving on, who was a big part of their face-offs, and it'll be interesting. But Tyler Mott coming back for another year anyway will help drastically with that. The shot blocking and the penalty killing in the playoffs was unreal.
Absolutely. Of their 3 RFAs, he's obviously most likely to get a contract done, I would say quickest.
Yes.
On the note of Manny Malhotra, he's a great coach and everything, and it's a good job for him getting the job in Toronto, but also you got to consider that, Jay Beagle was a great centerman before he came to Vancouver. True. Brendan Sutter was a great centerman and face-off guy before he came to Vancouver. Bo Horvat came into the league a great centerman, so, he probably helped refine and polish everything for everybody, and it wasn't a bad thing, but, I don't think it's going to be...
Yeah.
I think they're talented enough in that face-off dot that
they'll survive.
I don't think it's going to affect them so drastically.
Yeah. I guess that's definitely a good point. I just for the Canucks in the Vegas series, I think that was their biggest shining part of their game was the face-off dot.
Right.
And, DeBoer even said it, like, they couldn't basically fix that during that series with Vancouver. They knew Vancouver was going to be the better face-off team. And unfortunately for Vancouver, they couldn't use that to their advantage, but it was something positive to take out of that series. But yeah, all the best to Manny in Toronto, and I'm sure the Canucks will be fine again with their coaching staff they have now. So.
Yeah, I think so. I think Lawrence Gilman maybe pulled a couple strings there to get Manny over to Toronto.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on your Flyers, what they're going to do in the offseason? Or?
Well, I think it's no secret that Shane Gostisbehere is needing a change of scenery. He's fallen right off. Alain Vigneault was healthy scratching him frequently, and he was such a stud when he came into the league out of nowhere. A Calder finalist.
For sure.
it's just too bad that whatever's happened, a confidence issue or maybe just a depth chart issue, because the Flyers have so many good young defense like Travis Sanheim and Philippe Myers came out of nowhere undrafted and he's been awesome. So I can see Gostisbehere going somewhere. I read Toronto.
Yeah.
I don't.
Well,
see
every
it.
defenseman is going to
Yeah,
Toronto
I don't see
right
it.
now.
He's a Tyson Barrie type, and we saw how that works. So I can see him going to a team that needs a better puck moving. Maybe in Edmonton, but they have no money.
I wonder even about like Vegas.
Right.
Just I don't know, as a bottom four defenseman there.
It's all about what they'd be getting back, because the Flyers want a top six winger, right? They've been talking about Nylander, Gostisbehere forever. And
right, yeah.
I don't see anything close to
happening.
that. No, but they would be wanting a winger, right?
Yeah.
Recently I read, what was it, that they wanted to they would retain salary on Van Riemsdyk to throw him in and bring back a different top six winger that was more of a,
of course,
less power play specialist like JVR and could actually fly up the wing and skate.
Yeah, for sure. Again, I feel like every team right now has one of those contracts that just looks awful.
Yeah.
I mean, the positive, I guess, thing for the Canucks is that Louis Eriksson only has 2 more years now, right? Whereas JVR has, I think, 5.
Well, he signed a 5-year deal with Hextall, so I think this was number 2.
Okay,
he might
so
have 3 left.
More, yeah. Because, again, that deal at the time looked okay, but it's starting to look really bad now.
It made no sense to me, because that offseason Hextall had 2 things to do. Shore up the backup goaltender and get 2 more defense. And he went and got a top 6 winger.
Yeah.
And it didn't address the goaltending. It didn't address the defense. And it cost him and Hextall their jobs, ultimately.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, you saw how quickly he turned around when Fletcher went out. He got Justin Braun, he got Matt Niskanen, he brought in Kevin Hayes. And, this year was phenomenal for the Flyers.
Yeah, the Flyers, again, one of those weird teams where for the past decade it's been make the playoffs, miss the playoffs, make the playoffs, miss the playoffs. But they look like they've turned a corner here and they're gonna start contending for a bit anyway. So
well, I can't see Carter Hart. Going downhill too far from here. I mean, he could take a step back during the regular season like, most goalies can do. We've seen with Matt Murray, and we saw a little bit with Binnington, fortunately, in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But, no, I think that kid's going to be great going forward, and it's about time.
Yeah. The interesting thing for Philly, for sure, is they have kind of almost 2 teams in a way, where they have these young guys that are all very phenomenal. You have your Konechnys, you have your Provorovs, you have the young core, and then you have the older core. With
the 2 different cores. Yeah, absolutely.
Voracek. So it'll be interesting. I mean, it's obviously worked well so far, but it'll be interesting to see what they do and how they manage.
Yeah, I'm not too sure what they have to do in the offseason. Hopefully not bring back Brian Elliott. That would be the biggest thing on the wish
there's going to be so many goalies out there. It's hard to believe.
Just not Brian Elliott. Please, not Brian Elliott.
Yeah.
He is the worst. I can't believe he's still in the NHL, to be honest.
He's been around for a while now.
He's fallen so far from that all-star in St. Louis,
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
Yeah, no.
But
he needs to go.
At least Carter Hart is there.
That's
Looks like he's going to be able to shoulder the load, so.
Yeah, no, I think they'll be looking for just more internal growth, really. They got